reading is taken from Exodus 20, verses 1 to 17. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth below, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord who will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery.
Hello, Tim and Ingrid. Welcome from St. Peter's in Chester.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you.
You shall not covet your
So, give us a flavour of what your
female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbour. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
The second reading is taken from John chapter 2, verses 13 to 22. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my father's house."
hello, Tim and Ingrid. Welcome from St. Peter's in Chester.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you. Will consume me. The Jews then responded to him, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." They replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you are going to raise it in 3 days. But the temple he has spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Just want to start this time digging into this word in prayer, because I think this is a really important one that we really open our hearts to God for. Father God, I thank you for your word. I thank you for the bits that feel like a warm hug, that feel like they're comforting and gentle and soft. And I thank you as well for the challenges. I pray, Lord, that this morning our hearts and minds would be opened to your truth, that we would sit here before you and trust that you know best, and try to do our best to follow your ways. Amen. So, I'm going to start with a confession, as I often do. I am a terrible housekeeper. My goodness. I go to whole new levels of terrible housekeeping. But spring is that funny time of year, isn't it?
every year around about now, I start to get this itchy feeling where I just want to sort things out. The light starts coming back, the days start feeling a bit longer, and suddenly you notice things that have escaped your attention for the whole of winter. Dust on the shelves, piles of papers, cupboards that have quietly accumulated far more than you thought it was even possible to jam in them. Now, I should say, anyone who has ever been to my house will know I'm not famous for my enthusiasm for cleaning. It's not my natural gifting. I could probably write you a poem about cleaning, but actually doing it is less for me. But even at this time of year, I get that feeling. Even I feel it at this time of year. I get that feeling and I feel, right, something needs to be done. And for me, it's usually the tins cupboard. That's usually as far as I get. I open the tins cupboard, clear it out, and then decide that's me done for the year. But it feels like an archaeological dig of past good intentions, doesn't it? My grandma was amazing at this. So my grandma, bless her, she would insist on doing a proper sort out of the tins cupboard every year. And every year at Easter when we went up, she would have a carrier bag full of tins for us. And some of them were actually years out of date. And I wonder how they survived the previous year's clear out, but somehow they did, despite being like 5 or 6 years out of date. And I never quite worked out how that happened. But somehow, mysteriously, those ancient tins had survived the clean out year after year. And I think probably maybe some people know what that's like. Things quietly accumulate, they build up over time. Things get pushed to the back of the cupboard. And before long, what started as a little bit of clutter ends up as this drawer or this cupboard that we don't open. And I think life can actually feel a bit like that sometimes. There's the obvious things that make life feel chaotic: busy schedules, family responsibilities, even at the moment, worries in the world around us, really, uncertainty about the future. I think a lot of people would recognise a feeling that life feels a bit out of control at the moment. But there's another kind of chaos that we often feel, and I think it really affects us, but we sometimes don't recognise it as much. And that's not the chaos around us, but it's the chaos within us. Our lives can fill up with all kinds of things: worries, habits, distractions, attitudes, compromises, things that quietly move in and gradually begin to take up more and more space. They don't often arrive dramatically, but they just slowly accumulate like the out-of-date tins in the backs of cupboards. And before long, something that was meant to be ordered and peaceful and centred on God begins to feel really cluttered and crowded. The two readings we've heard today, thank you so much, it's so lovely having different voices doing the readings. Those readings really point us to that reality. One reading we hear the Ten Commandments, God giving his people a way of living that puts him front and centre. And in the other side, we hear Jesus walking into the temple of Jerusalem and quite literally turning the whole place upside down. Tables overturned, coins scattered, animals running around everywhere. It's a scene of disruption. But I wouldn't necessarily say that that scene is chaos, because it's something more hopeful than that. Both our passages show us that when things are out of order, God doesn't just ignore it, but he cleans out the house. Thankfully, he's a lot better at cleaning out than I am. So with that image of spring cleaning in mind, let's turn to the scene we just heard about in Mandy's reading from the Gospel of John. Because if we're honest, I don't know about you, but for me certainly, that passage can make me feel quite uncomfortable, the idea of Jesus as this seemingly destructive state. When many people picture Jesus, they imagine someone gentle and calm, who moves quietly through crowds with words of comfort and healing. And of course the Gospels do show that side to Jesus again and again. His compassion for the sick, his patience with people who are confused or searching, his mercy towards people who've made mistakes. But here we encounter a moment that feels quite different. Jesus enters the temple in Jerusalem, the centre of worship for Jews, the holiest place in the life of the whole nation. It was a place where people came to pray, offer sacrifices, and to be in the presence of God. For generations, it had been understood as the place
hear of in David. Instead, the temple courts were crowded with activity. John tells us people were selling cattle, sheep and doves. Others were sitting at tables exchanging money. A place that was meant to draw people in to worship resembled more of a busy marketplace. And it's worth saying that these activities had actually originally developed for practical reasons. Pilgrims travelled from Jerusalem from all over the Israelite community. They'd come long distances. They wouldn't be able to necessarily bring the animals that they needed for the sacrifices. They would need animals suitable that were there already. And the coins that were used in everyday Roman commerce had to be exchanged for the special currency that was accepted in the temple. So actually, in that sense, all of the systems that Jesus overturned had developed for a reason, to help worshippers take part in those temple rituals. But I think something deeper had gone wrong. What had begun as something useful had slowly and gradually taken over the space that belonged to God. The temple courts, that place of prayer and encounter, had filled up with noise, with transactions, with routines that served the system more than the worship. What should have helped people come closer to God had gradually crowded him out. And Jesus sees that immediately. And he does something dramatic. John tells us he makes a whip out of cords and begins driving the animals out of the temple courts. Tables are overturned and coins scatter across the stone floor. Sellers are told to take their goods and leave. If we pause for a moment and imagine that scene, it must have been astonishing. Animals running everywhere, people scrambling after rolling coins, an orderly arrangement of tables. Sorry, John, just imagine, I can't even see where you are. We've got a layout for these tables. These tables are all in the perfect place. Imagine them suddenly chucked all over the place. To anyone standing by, it must have looked like chaos. But actually what's happening isn't chaos. It's order being restored. It's that moment where all of the tins have been chucked out of the cupboard and are all over the kitchen floor. And you think, oh my goodness, why did I do this? But actually, what you're doing is restoring order. Jesus is not acting out of a loss of control. He's not expressing anger for the sake of anger. What he's confronting is the slow, quiet replacement of God with something else in people's lives. The temple belonged to God. It existed for a purpose. It was a place where people and God could meet in prayer and worship. And when it seemed like that purpose had been displaced by other priorities, even ones that seemed reasonable at face value, Jesus wasn't having it. He refused to accept that situation. And that's why he says these striking words, "Stop turning my Father's house into a market." In other words, this place has a purpose. It belongs to God. When something else takes over this space, it cannot be ignored. And that's something important for us to notice here. Sometimes the most loving thing Jesus does is disrupt what people have subconsciously learned to accept. Over time, habits and systems can settle into place so gradually that we don't even notice they're there, and no one questions them anymore. They simply become normal background noise. And yet when Jesus enters the scene, he sees clearly what belongs in the house of God and what does not. The centre of the story, there is a sentence that must have sounded impossible to understand when Jesus first spoke it. And after the disruption in the temple courts, the leaders confront him and ask for an explanation. If he's going to drive out traders and drive out all the animals and turn over the tables, they want to know what authority he has. In their minds, the temple is the heart of national and religious life. No one just walks in and disrupts it. So they ask him, what sign can you show to prove your authority to do these things? And Jesus responds with words that are both mysterious and profound. Destroy the temple, and I will raise it in 3 days. Must have sounded pretty absurd, actually. If you're listening, you must have thought, wow, that guy. The temple in Jerusalem was an enormous structure. one of the great building projects of the ancient world. It had already taken decades to construct and was still being expanded and beautified. And when the people around Jesus heard those words, they naturally assumed he was speaking about the physical building. And their response is almost sarcastic. You can see an eye roll, very Noah-esque. It's taken 46 years to build this temple. You're going to raise it in 3 days. But the Gospel writer helps us to see what they couldn't understand. John tells us that Jesus was speaking about the temple of his body. Jesus is quietly redefining what the temple is, where the place of encounter with God will be. For centuries, the temple had been understood as that place where God's presence dwelt among his people, where sacrifices were offered, prayers were lifted up, and the covenant between God and his people was lived out and expressed in worship. The entire religious life of the nation revolved around this place. But now, in the middle of that building, Jesus points not to the stone walls or to the gilded decorations, but to himself. The true meeting place between God and humanity is no longer a building, but it's Christ. In Jesus, God has come among his people in a way that no temple could fully contain. The presence of God is no longer limited to a sacred structure or a particular location. Instead, God's presence is the embodied life of his Son. And that's why this is the moment that Jesus speaks about raising the temple in 3 days. He's already pointing towards the resurrection. His body will be destroyed on the cross, but God will raise him again. And through that resurrection, a new way of encountering God is opened up. And then even the disciples didn't fully understand that at the time. How could they? John says that it was only later, after the resurrection, that they remembered those words and began to ruminate on the deeper meaning behind them. Looking back, they realised the cleansing of the temple had never simply been about chucking the animals out of a building, but it had been a sign pointing towards something far greater. God was establishing a new temple, not made out of stone, but built around the living presence of Christ. And once we begin to see that, the implications land in a really personal way. The New Testament goes on to say something really remarkable about those who belong to Christ. Through him and through the gift of the Holy Spirit, God doesn't remain distant from us. Instead, he comes to dwell with his people, in this room, in our hearts. The language of the temple begins to be applied to ordinary believers like you and me. Our lives, our communities, our bodies are described as places where God's presence now dwells. This means that the story of Jesus cleansing the temple is not only about a historical event from a long time ago, it becomes a picture of what Christ continues to do in the lives of those around him. If our lives are meant to be temples where God dwells, then the question naturally follows, what happens when Jesus enters our temple? And I would say the answer, if we're honest, is probably that he would start out by trying to clear some space. Just as he did in Jerusalem, he confronts the things that have taken up residence in our lives. And some of them might have arrived with really good intentions. Sometimes they've developed gradually over time. But when they begin to crowd out the presence of God, Christ does not simply ignore them. He begins the work of restoring the temple to its true purpose. Through Christ, our lives become a place where God is known. And that means the story we've not read is not just about a building that once stood in Jerusalem, it's about our hearts. And it raises a question for each of us about when God is in our hearts, what does he find there? Does he game I would highly recommend on my phone. What's going to happen next week? What do I need for the Asda order? Little clutter. And when Jesus comes into that space, he doesn't walk past those bits of clutter and pretend they're not there. He begins the work of turning them over and clearing them away. And it can feel unsettling, but actually it's a deeply hopeful thing, because it means that Jesus cares enough to want to sort out the cupboard of our hearts. And it can feel uncomfortable because it involves change. It involves recognising the habits and attitudes and priorities and ways of living that don't feed our faith in God. But the purpose of the cleansing is never destruction. It is restoration. And as Jesus overturns the tables in the temple, not because he despises the temple, not because he wants to give up on the temple, but because he loves what the temple was meant to be. In the same way, he confronts the clutter and disorder in our lives, not because he rejects us, but because he intends to rebuild us as places where God dwells. If I'm honest with myself, I often sometimes prefer to think of Jesus clearing the temple with his whip and the animals, rather than trying to sort out my own priorities. But this is where we are led. If Christ is the true temple, then through him our lives becomes places where God dwells. And this is the picture of the work that Jesus continues to do, that Jesus is doing. He begins to look round and I would say he probably doesn't find open rebellion against God, but he finds quieter things, more subtle things. And sometimes anxiety can play a big part in that. We become so used to carrying our own worries that we begin to shape everything around those worries. Instead of being able to trust God with the future, we find ourselves constantly trying to manage and control what lies ahead, and terrible for that. Sometimes it's resentment, a hurt from the past that we struggle to let go of. It grows in a corner of our hearts, and it influences how we see other people, how we see God's image in people. Sometimes it's pride, self-reliance, the belief that we can sort it out ourselves, thank you very much. Sometimes it's simply busyness. Our lives fill up with responsibilities, tasks, commitments, distractions, and the quiet space that we try to put aside for prayer ends up being harder and harder to find. And it doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but many of those are just woven into ordinary life. Almost imperceptibly, they begin to occupy more and more space. And I think there's actually a real parallel with how that happened in the temple courts. Things that were put there for a purpose, over time became the priority. Something subtle needed to change. What had been practical for worship had begun to dominate the space. And what I saw when I read these passages this time that I hadn't seen before was actually the tragedy of the temple wasn't the things that happened there, but it was that the acceptable things had replaced God. When you walked into the temple, what you saw was animals and money, not a space for God. And that's how the clutter in our heart works as well. I don't think it's obvious sins that most often displace God from the centre of our lives. It's often really good things that have just grown too large in our priorities: work, family, reputation, comfort, security, even church activity itself can block out the space. They're all good gifts, but gifts that can begin to occupy a space that God was meant to be centre of. So, at that point, Jesus walks in, just as he did in Jerusalem, and he sees immediately what belongs and what does not belong. And out of love for us, he begins to clear out that space. And sometimes that happens gently. Sometimes it happens through moments that disrupt our routine or help us to turn our eyes again to him. And sometimes it comes through the convictions of the Holy Spirit, when the Spirit touches our hearts and draws our attention to something that no longer belongs in the temple. But however it happens, the purpose is always the same: clearing out space so that God can dwell more fully at his rightful place in the when Jesus begins overturning the temples of our heart, we're given a choice. We can resist him and we can hold on to those things that we really, really want and that we've grown comfortable with. Or we can allow him to continue that work of clearing, trusting that he knows better than we do, and he knows about what needs to be in our hearts. And that's where the other reading that we have today comes in and where it's so important. The cleansing of the temple doesn't stand alone. It sits alongside the Ten Commandments, something God gave thousands of years before. And they also might be surprising, but they're about putting life back in its proper order, with God at the first. When we hear the Ten Commandments, they can sound a bit weird in our ears, I think, sometimes. Like Noah's, oh bless him, Noah's just discovered, thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's ass, and man, he loves it. But there's just, it does sound odd, doesn't it, when you think about the list of rules, the set of restrictions, commands telling people what they should and shouldn't do. That's not what we preach from pulpits nowadays, or even from the front of church. And I think it's quite easy to misunderstand what they're actually about. But if we listen to how they begin, I found that really helpful. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, the land of slavery. In other words, the commandments aren't a way of earning God's love. They're not a ladder that we've got to climb up to be acceptable before him. They come after the rescue. God has already delivered his people from slavery. He's already brought them out of Egypt. The commandments are given to people who have already been saved, who have already been claimed, who are already loved and known and in relationship with him. So they're not the conditions of belonging to God, but they're the shape of life with God. It's teaching people how to live in a community with God in the centre. And when you look at it through that light, it doesn't feel as much like restrictions as reordering. The first commandment sets the foundation for everything that follows. You shall have no other gods than me. And it's not simply a rule about religious practice. It's what is in the centre of our lives. Who or what is what we put our trust in, our loyalty. What do we give our attention to? And the second commandment continues that theme, warning against turning created objects into objects of worship. In other words, do not take something and give it authority over your life. When we hear about honouring God's name, about keeping the Sabbath, and structuring life in a way that God is not squeezed to the margins but honoured in our hearts. And only after those commandments about our relationship with God do we get into the way we treat other people, honouring our parents, respecting life, guarding faithfulness in relationships, protecting truth, refusing the pull of envy, covetousness, and jealousy. Taken together, the commandments describe a life in which everything is brought back into its proper place, with God at the centre and everything else ordered around him. And when we see it that way, it actually feels quite familiar to the temple and to what Jesus did in the temple. Both are about restoring things that are out of alignment. In the temple courts, that space of prayer had been taken over by other clutter. And in the commandments, God's teaching his people how to structure life so that the centre remains clear and free from clutter. In both cases, the question for us is the same. Who or what is sitting at the heart of our lives? Whenever something else moves into that central place, ambition, security, comfort, success, reputation, life loses its proper order. The commandments are not there to make life smaller. They're there to keep life rightly orientated. You might think of it like the advice we see in the doctor's surgery. When we read posters encouraging us to eat our 5 a day or cut down on alcohol, I don't know about you, I don't normally sit there thinking, wow, what git, that doctor is just trying to ruin my life. He wants me to have no fun and to sit at home with my fruit. Actually, I tend to think, that's probably good advice, that, yeah. Yeah, maybe he's got a point, maybe I do need to eat a bit more fruit. Because God's commandments in the same way are not there to diminish our life, but guide us towards life that is whole whole and ordered and centred on Him. Life that is good for us and for the people around us. In that sense, they function like a careful organising of a house after a thorough clean-out. Once the clutter is removed, things can be put back where they belong. God's commands do that for our hearts. They protect the space where God is meant to dwell. And I think, certainly for me when I was preparing this, I was well aware of a sense of resistance. Because that reordering can be uncomfortable. And it means we have to admit that we're not the ones who get to choose. Allowing God, rather than our preferences and our habits, even the pressures of the culture that we live in, allowing God to define what the centre of our life should look like. That requires humility. It requires trust. It requires willingness to let go of things that we might have grown comfortable with. But the story of the temple reminds us why it matters so much. When the centre is lost, everything else becomes distorted. The commandments are God's way of protecting the centre. Not rules imposed from outside, but structure of a life where God dwells. I don't think I can do that by myself. I don't know about you. I don't think I can recognise the things that are wrong and put them right by myself. I think that requires the transforming presence of Christ in my heart and in my life. And it's also not going to be something that happens today or tomorrow or the day after. But I pray that over the next, I'm 30, so what, 32? Let's give me 60 years, let's be generous. Over the next 60 years of my life, I pray that every day is a journey of transformation, of reordering my heart again and again and moving closer to being who God called me to be. I'm going off script here, but if you think of that Psalm 139, we were fearfully and wonderfully made. Before we were put in our mother's wombs, God held us in His hands. He pictured what He wanted for us, what He wanted for our lives. He has loved us for that long. And in that context, if every day is a journey towards moving closer to Him, moving closer to being exactly what He wanted for us, I think that's something really special. And one of the ways that we can do this that I really wanted to mention this morning, I think there's something about being in community together. This church has been such a blessing to me, to my family. It has been such a precious place. And being here on a Sunday is such a beautiful way of starting that process of reordering our lives. Martha said to me this morning, she woke up in a bit of a grump after a late night last night. She said, "Oh, I don't want to go to church this morning." I said to her, "Babe, I absolutely hear that. Some mornings we feel like that. Some mornings we have got other priorities. But actually, God gives us His ears all week round. He gives us His presence all week round. And one of the things we can do is give Him a few hours of our time on a Sunday morning and dedicate that to God. That is an intentional space in our lives that we carve out for God. We say, actually, this time is a sacrifice to you. It goes back to the earliest followers of Jesus. After the resurrection, people gathered together, broke bread, prayed, and encouraged one another. And across centuries, people have continued with that same pattern. Part of letting Christ reorder our lives involves a quiet discipline of creating patterns. And that doesn't come easily to all of us. But choosing to gather with God's people is one of those practices that we can really lean on. We're reminding ourselves and each other that God comes first. We're declaring with our lives that worship matters, that community matters, like love you guys. That meeting together with Christ matters. And there's something else happening as well. When we gather faithfully, we're not only shaping our own hearts, but we are quietly witnessing to one another and other people in our lives who don't go to church. We're witnessing what it looks like to order our lives around Christ. Every person who walks in the door is an encouragement to someone else. That act of gathering strengthens the community of Christ. We're stepping into something that Christians have been doing since the very beginning. Jesus himself invited his followers to gather in his name, remember him, and share a meal of bread and wine together. Across generations and centuries, believers have done that. So when we come, we're not simply attending an event, we're participating in the rhythm of life that puts Christ in the centre. I think there's an invitation here for each of us today. I hope that none of you leave here feeling weighed down or pressured by anything I've said. But I pray that we can all leave here with an invitation and a willingness in our hearts to let Jesus in to do that work again. Even if it's something we do quite regularly, to re-invite him to examine our hearts and gently, hopefully, turn over the tables that need turning over. Trusting that when he clears something away, it's not because he wants to knock us down, but because he wants to make room for something amazing. Just a few moments we will share bread and wine together, just as Christians have done for 2,000 years. And as we do, it might just be worth holding a prayer in our hearts. So I'm going to pray for us now. Lord Jesus, if there is anything in the temple of our lives that does not belong there, help us to clear it away today. Amen. Because the cool news is